Allegations of racism have hit Buckingham Palace, with a key aide quitting over remarks made to a charity campaigner. One of the late Queen's friends questioned the ethnicity of a black lady who runs a black women's domestic abuse charity. Well, she has now resigned over allegedly making racist comments. In this edition of the Spotlight, we will look at how this is not the first time that racism claims have been leveled against the monarchy, and how deep this issue runs between the descendants of the monarchy itself. First, let me introduce our guest for this edition of the Spotlight. Shabir Rizvi, political analyst, joins us from London. Also joining us is Tony Gosling, who's an investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Welcome to you both. I'll start with you, Shabir Rizvi. Taking a look at the incident itself, this is what we have: a royal aide asking a black British visitor at Buckingham Palace, "What part of Africa are you from?" Do you think that was a racist question?
Hi, good evening, Kaveh. Look, the whole issue of racism is far deeper in the royal household, as we know very clearly that the Queen's husband, Prince Philip, was prone to making racist comments wherever he went, albeit he's dead now, and we are told that we are not to talk in bad language or even unsavory words to be used of the dead. But the reality is that Prince Philip, when he went to visit China, he told British students there that if you stay long enough in China, you might have slit eyes. And comments of that type. People used to say that he was just saying that in jest. But the reality is that sometimes when people say what comes out of their mouth is really what they've been thinking, pondering, and what's in their heart. So quite often, the royal household has made racist comments. Secondly, we also know that with Meghan's marriage into the royal household, she, as we all know, is not of Anglo-Saxon white origin. She's a person of a color. And she has had many racist jibes at her, which has been reported by both her and her husband. So it's quite deep-rooted. And historically, obviously, the royal household has been part of the British imperial past, in which they have quite openly been racist, have abused people from Africa, Asia, and South America. But I think I want to look at a bit deeper and wider, if you like. This is a particular malaise, not just in the royal household and the ruling elite in UK, although we are told that we have a non-white prime minister in UK of Indian origin. But racism is still there. It's institutionalized in many professions, in many areas of work. Recently, Joseph Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs, made crude comments, as I'm sure all of you recall, when he talked Europe a garden and the rest of the world as jungle. So the elite in Europe, in UK, are very clearly, they might not sort of vocalize it as much as they did in the past, but it is insidious. It is deep-rooted. And
what would you call them? It sounds like you're holding back a word that you want to say, but you're not saying it. Would you use a word to describe that?
Well, look, it is without doubt, not only myself, many of the commentators in the last 48 hours have been saying that it is a racist comment, without any doubt.
All right.
There's no missing word.
Let's move on to Tony Gosling. Tony Gosling, so what do you think? You have this 83-year-old, one of the late Queen's most trusted aides, who's, I guess, resigned from her position there, and Prince William's godmother, asking these discriminatory questions. If you think that, or if you agree with that, does that reflect the same on, for example, the King and Queen descendants, like Prince and his children, maybe? Or how do you view this?
Well, look, questioning somebody's ethnicity is not racist. I mean, it can be if it's said in a specifically derogatory way, but this wasn't. The actual words that were said was, "Where are your people from?" Now, this is, you can see this just as an icebreaker, wanting genuine questions about what part of the world people are from. I mean, it's quite a reasonable question to ask of white people, Asian people, coloured people, pink or purple people, whatever colour they happen to be. It's perfectly reasonable to ask what part of the world the family's from, and that's what Lady Susan Hussey did, the lady who's resigned. But let's think about the backdrop to all of this, is that we've got a new king. And what the king is doing is he's weeding out a lot of the staff who used to be there and were favourites of the Queen. I think King Charles is very different to Queen Elizabeth. Their personalities are very different. And I don't think that the royal family at the moment is racist. I think in the past it was. In fact, the whole of Britain probably, you could say, was racist. Up until around about the 1960s, it was the norm. When Britain had an empire, we had a culture which accepted racism. In fact, there's a comedy TV series, Till Death Us Do Part, which came out in the 1970s in Britain, which started to puncture this whole idea. I think what you will find, though, within the establishment and royal circles is an enormous amount of prejudice against poor people and in embracing rich people. So it doesn't matter what nationality they are or what race they are. If they're rich and greedy, the British establishment will embrace them. And I think also there is most definitely a faith-based bias. That is to say, what happened when Dodi Fayed, Mohammed Al Fayed's son, started to get friendly with Diana and looked like he was going to marry into the royal family? Well, certainly it's my belief, and my research tells me, that the royal family decided that she was going to be assassinated to stop that marriage taking place. So I think there are big prejudices in there, but race is not one of them. And this incident is certainly not justifiable as a genuine racist incident. And I think it trivializes the whole idea of racism, which is an abhorrent concept. To take a comment which is just about questioning somebody's ethnicity and to jump on the bandwagon, the gravy train, and say this is racism. It's not racism.
Okay there, Shabir Rizvi, you heard our guest Tony Gosling. I think he disagrees with you. Do you have something to say to him regarding his view?
Well, look, I respect Tony very much, and I sort of concur with what he's saying, that, that sort of investigation to ascertain where someone is from, or, having a conversation about their ethnicity. I myself, I'm a person of a darker color. When I meet people at parties and so on, and they ask me, where are you from? I always say I'm from London. Then they say, are you really from London? As though it's a surprising sort of question. So I don't know whether one could say that that is racism in itself, but it actually certainly sort of shows a lack of understanding, if you like. Would that same question be posed to a white person from Bradford or from Burnley or from Manchester? Where are your ancestors from? Or what's your origin? So I think, it's an interesting sort of debate to have, that why would a white person...
So why has it turned out to be big news then?
Well, look, I think it has turned out to be big news is because, as our guest was saying, that the new king is perhaps trying to clear out some of these elements from the royal household. But the fact of the matter is that, and I agree with our guest, is that in UK, it's not really sometimes your race or your religion or what have you. So long as you've got a lot of money and you're greedy, that's the reason why Mr. Sunak is the Prime Minister, because he's wealthy, rich and greedy, if you like.
Well, taking a look at what you said there, Tony Gosling, you say that you don't think that the royal family at this point is I'm not too sure if we can use the word racist, because racist has a harsh tone. But if he perhaps, I mean, he grew up obviously with his mom, and the Queen was known to not even admit, based on the research done here in terms of the history, if you go back, of Queen Elizabeth II, never acknowledged the monarchy's historical role in supporting for example, the black slave trade. So she was then said to have this bias, if I may use that word, towards the now deceased Queen. But he grew up in that environment. And there are plenty of other examples. Do you think then, therefore, he is not a product of that?
Well, look, I think the way the British Empire developed, quite obviously, and there was horrific subjugation of people, particularly after the Second World War in Kenya, absolutely appalling, which is, it was white soldiers, white British soldiers oppressing and killing Kenyans. And I mean, this is obviously, there's a racist element to that. But I think that there is a really, there's a big attempt here in order to smear the monarchy to a certain extent with this, because certainly Prince Philip, I think, for example, he would crack what you might call racist jokes, but he was trying to break the ice. He had actually quite a good sense of humour. I don't think he believed that that these other races, black people are inferior. I don't believe that he really thought that at all. But he did see this as a way of breaking the ice and cracking a joke. Now, some people might say his joke's not funny, but actually he saw himself, because the Queen was in the spotlight, Philip was always in the background. And I can tell you, aristocratic men don't really like hanging around in the background. So he saw his role as a sort of deal breaker, icebreaker, and somebody who would bring a bit of a sense of humour to an otherwise boring occasion. And so I honestly do not believe that the current royal family is, because they, particularly Kate and William, have made a very great effort, I think, to modernise them. I mean, the whole question, one of the big questions here is a monarchy a good idea? The establishment, is this the place that we should be basing it? And I don't believe it necessarily is. But the thing is, every now and again, a monarchy brings up in the family, the ruling family. I mean, I remember Donald Trump in his speech the other day was saying that he spoke to President Xi in China. And he said that, well, actually, you're really the king of China, aren't you? You're the president until you die. So therefore, you're the king. And these sorts of jokes may, go down quite well. But effectively, China doesn't have a properly elected president because she is president for life. And the idea of having rulers that are rulers for life and then maybe pass on that power onto their children is a very flawed idea. And I think we need to look more closely at that. Although, of course, sometimes, as I say, it throws up somebody that really does give a damn and can be a good ruler from time to time. And we had in Britain Charles I, sure, who actually did a good job and had his head chopped off for his trouble. So I don't believe the current, and particularly with Meghan Markle was extremely rude to her father. She's been appalling to her father. She has told very close to the truth, maybe the truth, I wouldn't say necessarily lies, but some awful things about her father. And I think she is trying to attach herself to the British monarchy in order to try and bring it down. So let's not forget that there are attempts to sabotage political power as well. And I think maybe that this decision of Lady Susan Hussey to resign is a part of that, as Charles sweeps away the old wood and brings his own people in. And I don't think that's going to be a pretty sight once the old people are gone.
Yeah, I need to ask you to state what you said, because I don't know if I understood you properly. What you said about Meghan. You said what about her and the royal family?
Well, she's talking about, she has been an absolutely appalling in relation to her father. She has lied about his role, and I don't think that I think she's, he wanted to be part of the wedding.
No, but,
of course he did.
But what you said about her and the royal family, in terms of her wanting to bring down the royal family, is that what I heard you say?
I think so, yeah. I think she has attached herself to the royals. She's attached herself to Harry by pulling on his heartstrings, and she is now starting to throw bricks at the royal family, and she's managing to get Harry to do that too. Well, so I think, it may even be that she's part of an intelligence operation against the British monarchy.
Interesting. Shabir Rizvi, well, who would have thought that we would have gone into different issues that's pretty much are not at the focus of what we thought would be, which is the whole idea of racism that erupted here. But thank you for that, Tony Gosling. Anyways, Shabir Rizvi, Tony Gosling mentions the part about what the monarchy itself is all about, which is, some have even said it's a symbol of institutional racism, and the fact that the UK system of an inherent head of state is racist by default. So since he's brought it up, do you agree with that? Is that how you see the British monarchy?
But look, obviously, the royal commentators often try to portray the royal household as modernizing itself and sort of evolving over a period of time. But what we have got to understand that it is a hereditary system. It is a system where no one is elected. You're born into the family, if you like, into the business. And the legacy of the business is not really savory at all, as has been commented earlier during this discussion. So we've got to really move from there to see whether the royal family, the royal household, the company itself can change into a manner that society wants it to be. If I sort of take a different angle to it, one is talking about Philip breaking the ice and making jokes so that the conversation can flow. Just imagine, if the leader of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khamenei, was making comments about Europeans or other nations in a derogatory manner. Would we regard that as sort of humor, as breaking the ice to have a conversation? No, because when you are in certain leadership positions, you have to use the language in such a manner that is not hurtful, that doesn't sort of show any kind of racism or, some kind of bias in favor of your own nation. You've got to be diplomatic. Your language certainly has to express feelings of love, compassion, and fraternity, not comments which could be easily not misconstrued, but actually in reality, if you analyze those words, are racist by any imagination. So, if you've got to put that in the context that in any other leader of any other country making these comments about the French, the Dutch, the Italians, the British, the Germans, I think would be taken to task.
Sure. Well, Tony Gosling, I want to ask you about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Not about that Oprah Winfrey interview in per se, but because that's been talked about and discussed, and maybe this will trigger that discussion again. But for lack of time also, I want to ask you about what actually both have said regarding the media, where they said a British press that they decried not only as threatening, lying, and intrusive, but overly racist. So I'm curious as to the role that the media plays here, and in that case, that's how they described it. Do you agree with that? Is that what happened? And also in this case, are we looking at that happening again?
This is what they call playing the race card, and this is what Meghan has been doing. I think there's very legitimate criticism of Meghan and her behaviour and her actions, quite normal to see, but she is saying, well, this is racially motivated. I mean, for example, we had one of the best radio presenters in Britain, Danny Baker, removed by the BBC from his weekly Saturday morning programme. It was one of the most popular programmes on radio here in the UK because he had made a joke which was referring to potential racism with Meghan. Actually, he didn't know, apparently he didn't know that she had any kind of racial side to her because, I mean, obviously she's mixed race. It's not that easy to tell. And just because he'd made that something that could be possibly construed as racist, he was removed. So I think there's been a lot of attempts to should we say, juice up this whole idea of, oh, if people are criticising Meghan, then they're racists. And it's used as an excuse to get rid of people, as we've seen, I think, here with Lady Susan Hussey, that they wanted to get rid of for other reasons. But I mean, let's not forget, in the UK, something quite important to remember. We've done, I think, quite well as an anti-racist nation. We've done in London now, there are 2/3 of the population are from ethnic minorities, and yet London sees very little, if any, real racial violence. And I think due to the Metropolitan Police, I'm not a big fan of, but I think they've done quite well in policing these things like these far-right events to make sure that London is actually a genuine racial melting pot where other races, and it's just simply not acceptable to have these racial racist tendencies in London, it's not seen as acceptable. It's the sort of thing that if you get into an altercation, you're likely to get thrown out of the pub by the other members of the people in the pub. Racism is generally not acceptable in London. Where it does happen, of course, you know, any country that has 2/3 of ethnic minorities come into its capital city and make the indigenous population a 1/3 minority is bound to have those sort of problems. But I think London's dealt with it very well overall.
Shabir Rizvi, do you agree?
Well, certainly, being a Londoner, having lived all my life in London, I've seen sort of different phases of racism. But certainly in the last 10, 15, 20 years, if you like, it is certainly a melting pot. There is an, if you like, issue of open racism. But what I would argue is that what has happened to the British society is that open racism is not there. If you like, you know, there are no notices in the houses which used to be in the 60s, no Indians and dogs to rent, or, you know, places of entertainment, pubs and so on would have those kinds of stuff. Yes, those are not there, but it is very insipid, very clever sort of racism. There's ample research to show that, you know, people who apply with for jobs with Muslim names, they're not called for interviews. There's research to show that is the case. Or people who may have non-Anglo-Saxon sounding names may not be called for interviews. Or, you know, when you have a conversation with someone on the telephone, and if you sound like a Londoner or someone with a sort of English accent, people don't realize that that person may be of a different color. But when they meet them, perhaps the jobs are not offered. So it's the clever kind of racism which is operating, I believe, still to this day.
All right. What I'm curious about, Tony Gosling, I'm going to go back to the media again, because perhaps that's a window into how things are seen, which is different than what you have said in a sense now. But you can put it into context for us, because based on one particular source, which was repeated in other areas also online, based on British journalists who have said the British media is deeply racist, not only against biracial American actress who married a prince, but also to Muslims, immigrants, Black Britons, and South Asians. Do you agree with that?
Well, no, I definitely don't. I mean, I'm a member of the Journalists Union, and when we go to our annual conferences, you can see a very good spread of different ethnic minorities actually are journalists. And OK, it's maybe not 2/3, even though many of the journalists are based in London, ethnic minorities, but it's certainly around about half and half. So I think what we've seen over the years is an integration of these migrants that have come into Britain into mainstream British society, into the professions. In fact, many people who are working in the civil service now are specifically from the Middle East and Asian parts of the world. And I honestly think we've done a pretty good job, considering the brutality when, you know, the British Empire, when we were the bullies of the world, in integrating, and a bit of payback, I suppose, making sure that those countries that received the sharp end of that brutality actually got
let me jump in and give 30 seconds. Sorry, Tony Gosling, give 30 seconds to Shabir Rizvi. We just have 30 seconds to give to you, Shabir Rizvi. In conclusion here, please tell us about the Windrush incident. What happened there? I want to do a history check there and to end it on that. 30 seconds.
Well, in 30 seconds it's going to be difficult, but
I know.
Windrush was something that happened that, you know, immigrants who came from the Caribbean, the life was made difficult for them, although they had lived here for decades. But when they returned to their countries, they were not allowed to come back to the UK. And that was a scandal that happened during Theresa's May period. And that is a black mark of, again, if you like, institutionalized racism in UK.
Okay, very well. We'll leave it there, which she came out and apologized for. Tony Gosling, thank you so much, investigative journalist. And Shabir Rizvi was just speaking there, political analyst from London. Thank you to you both. With that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From Mikaba Tagway, it's goodbye. Until next time.